Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas. Welcome back to LMI Podcast. And on today's topic, we have AI assistance and GPT, megatrends revolutionizing access to justice. That is the theme. And so today, let my co-host, Thomas Giglione, introduce himself. Go ahead, Thomas.
This is Thomas Giglione from Toronto, Canada, from We Agree Mediators. We have a very interesting guest today, Megan Ma from Stanford University. We're going to be talking about several of her projects integrating AI with the legal professions. One of the projects she's working on is supervisory AI agents for legal professional rules of conduct and many other projects. Megan, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit more, touch on some of the projects that you're working on, including this one with regards to legal professional rules of conduct and supervisory AI agents? It's a mouthful, but maybe you could boil it down to so we can understand.
Yeah, sure. So the majority of my work actually and my background is in law and linguistics. And so I had a natural affinity towards large language models. It's in the name. It's a sort of natural progression. And I have done work in the space of legal NLP beforehand. But effectively, I wrote my PhD on how do you translate law into computer code. And so that sort of extended further into some of the projects that I'm working on now. Most of my work is centered around this idea of how do you kind of train large language models on experiential knowledge? I think a lot of the legal profession is beyond the four corners of the legal document. And so while we've seen a lot of generative AI tools being trained on the legal work product, we're not seeing a lot of how the legal process and the legal brain can be captured in these tools. And so much of my work has now centered on this idea of how do we systematically train generative AI, leverage its relative strengths of imagination and creativity, and use it to our benefit as legal professionals. And so this is kind of expanded into primarily two ways, in legal education and professional training, as well as this interesting space of risk and governance, including supervisory AI agents. And so a little bit more about that specific project. Supervisory AI is primarily this idea that agent frameworks, they allow for kind of specification of abstract goals and then allowing these models to identify ways in which it could achieve those goals. It's a little bit more abstract. So it has both, planning and execution elements to it. We think that the analogy sort of I use the most is autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars. This was a technology that was an emerging technology not that long ago, but we kind of had this pivot in the way that we've seen risk mitigation of this technology. So in the beginning, everyone was talking about autonomous vehicles as if, it was all about the trolley problem, right? Well, what if the car had to identify and make the moral decisions between, X and Y? But then later on, the focus of the technology started to evolve around what are the intelligent alarms that we could be integrating into the car so that we can signal and alert the human to make those decisions when it comes to it. And I think it's the exact same approach here of what types of guardrails that we should be seeing going forward. And so we try to explore this idea of can we use small models? The quintessential debate between small models and large language models is it's the oyster shucking knife versus the Swiss Army knife. And so what I'm imagining here is you're using an oyster shucking knife analogy. You're training everything you need the small model to know about the professional rules of legal conduct. And so, for example, the ABA model rules, and this sparked obviously out of the news of the ChatGPT lawyer that folks, were worried about, am I actually using generative AI in a responsible manner? And recently, actually, the ABA came out with ethical guidance and practical guidance on what is responsible use. But our whole idea is if we can train the model on everything related to the parameters of these ABA model rules of conduct, then can we then use this as an intelligent alarm, integrate it into our systems so that they become the machine watchdog for us? And so what we mean by that is, oh, I'm engaging with a client, for example. I might use an AI tool for legal research, drafting, whatnot. These are leveraging these large language models. If a small model is kind of living locally on your device, on your laptop, it never leaves anything outside of that space, not in the cloud, then it could actually flag the moments in which it thinks, oh, when you inputted this information, you may have accidentally, or it may accidentally leak client information, and that could breach client confidentiality. And so in that case, it will flag it and then signal it to a human lawyer. In the same way, again, as an autonomous vehicle, if it sees something like an obstacle or a pedestrian potentially in the way, it will flag it to the human to ask them to take back control. This is exactly the idea of supervisory AI.
Very intriguing.
Yeah, let me interject. Megan,
Sure.
before I publish this, if you could send us the ABA guidelines or guidance that they've published, that would be great. So I can put it in the show notes so that if folks are interested, because I have not been following up along on what the ABA has been doing in terms of this. So it would be appreciated. So your work focuses on the intersection of computable law and generative AI. How do you envision this combination reshaping the legal practice and jurisprudence in the next decade?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think right now, a lot of those who are seasoned veterans in the legal technology space, they have a whole tech stack that exists. And I think the question that people have seen before them is, do I just get rid of this tech stack and just replace it with generative AI? And the obvious question here is no. And you'll see work that's been coming out from Damien Reel, for example, in how do you leverage symbolic AI or symbolic rules-based systems with the kind of statistical probabilistic models of generative AI. And I think that what really my interest here is understanding the comparative advantage of different tools for different use cases. I think we spent the first year when we got excited about generative AI and it came on board, it was all like a spaghetti on the wall approach, right? It's like, whatever are we going to throw at it and see what sticks and what makes sense for the legal profession? Well, we actually have technologies that do much better work. If we need elements of accuracy, if we need elements of reproducibility, we should be leaning on rules-based systems. We should not be using generative AI for it. But there are other elements like leveraging the models to be a sparring partner, to be your brainstorming tool. That's what these models are amazing for. And so a lot of my work and why I think about the intersection is, what are certain ways in which we can codify the law, by codify, I mean using computer code to automate systems using rules versus leveraging kind of the linguistic aspect, a little bit much more of the fluid inferencing element. And so I always talk about it as, rather than a division of labor, we're starting to enter into an era of division of machine labor.
Dr. Ma, I read a little bit about your LinkedIn profile. Later on, we could share that link. Everybody loves a story, and you mentioned being inspired by the stories of others. Can you share a particular story that significantly influenced your approach to combining logic, cognition, and linguistics in your own research at Stanford?
So I will say that why I have been inspired by other people's stories is because war stories and anecdotes are how lawyers teach other lawyers. And what's interesting here is, as I mentioned before, so many of the ways in which we are training large language models is focused again on the work product, meaning the process to get to that contract, the process to get to that legal brief has already been done. And so these models are basically just trained on a final end product without understanding how we even got there. And so I think it's very different than the way that we've historically built our next generation of lawyers. And so how can we start training our models to understand the experiences that we've had and what the legal brain looks like, as opposed to just purely the document itself? And so when it comes to stories that inspire me, for example, we recently released our M&A negotiation simulator. This was entirely built based off of endless stories and endless anecdotes of these, moments in which, M&A partners of 40 years of experience have come forward to us and say, these were things that, left a mark to me and I will never do again because this was detrimental to the client or something like that. And so what I wanted to showcase and why I'm inspired by the stories is because I think that's the future of how we train and build our technology for the legal profession.
Yeah, share my
that's kind of like using the carrot and the stick approach, right? Cognitive psychology on the AI models. Is that basically the approach that we're taking?
Yes, in a way. And then I think as well, there have been a lot of interesting work that has started to come forward around the idea of can you actually rehearse something before it actually happens? And so there's exciting work from Professor Di Yang. She's also at Stanford in the computer science department. She works on building a platform to basically have people practice conflict resolution before it actually happens. And so you can get better skills and things like that. And all of this taps into soft skills. It taps into behavioral understanding of situations. So you're exactly on point there, Thomas, about, how do you leverage different parts of cognitive behavior into the models?
So, as an innovative leader in a rapidly evolving field, how do you balance the need for immediate results with the long-term potential of emerging AI technologies in the law?
So this is an easy question for me because I'm an academic. And so for us, immediate results are never really something we care for because at the end of the day, our stakeholders are not asking us for returns or immediate returns. What we care about is tackling the hard problems. And so if it's something that requires immediate return or lower lifts, then obviously it makes sense for industry to be tackling those problems. But what we care about is how do we change the frontier of how the technology is being developed. And these things you can't see immediate returns from. All of our research projects take at least 12 months to understand how we can move forward. And I think for me, like what I think innovation is about, at least from the research side or at least from the academic side, is we don't want to see what is immediately approachable. We want to see what we want our tools to do kind of in 5-10 years. And so, for example, we often work with law firm partners to do this co-creation of the prototypes that we produce. And a lot of their questions are like, wow, I wish I had X. And the X is sort of something that they can't necessarily build today, but the technology is available. It's just how do you actually synthesize legal knowledge in this way is still a mystery. And I think that that's what, researchers like myself are extremely excited and curious about. For example, I think being able to identify ways to capture experiential knowledge, putting out a methodology on that, that's something I don't think, it's that easy when you're in an industry setting where you're going to have failures and you're going to have setbacks, and so doing those pivots are a lot easier in an academic space as opposed to in an industry kind of immediate return kind of space.
Dr. Ma, I like to go off a little bit on a segue, a little bit of a tangent. I'm curious, with all your work with AI, if you've kind of could you predict when AI will achieve singularity, and AI will use the carrot and stick approach on us and, have the tables turned around, and how will that how will that affect your research? How will it affect the legal profession when the tables are turned and we have AI talking to each other and involving AI where, you know, they will be basically in control through the singularity?
So I will say that when it comes to AI, they already talk to one another. And so it depends on sort of what your interpretation of the quote unquote singularity. My personal view is that I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. And I think that's a pushback to Ray Kurzweil's thoughts on the singularity. To me, I think as these tools continue to evolve, it really depends on the way that we are training them. At the end of the day, like it's about putting together the right systems. And it's not just one particular system. I think we talk or like to talk about AI as sort of an amorphous entity. I don't think that's necessarily the case. There are different levels. And just like, you know, autonomous vehicles, you'll see, you know, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to dictate, you know, the level of the autonomous nature of this vehicle. I think there's the same sort of characteristic down the line. I think a lot of people are working on very on the ground ways in which we can put guardrails and safeguards, implement the right policies into these tools. I am kind of hopeful for some level of human machine collaboration. And so I always imagine, you know, I put out this, so not that long ago, Cognition Labs, they had released the first ever autonomous software engineer. And one really exciting kind of experiment that we saw was, well, you know, someone decided to deploy this tool named Devin, or the autonomous software engineer, loose on their own team's Slack. And so they said, oh, welcome, this is our new colleague, Devin, blah, blah. It can fill in all of the tasks that we need, for example. And well, lo and behold, Devin apparently had started interacting with the other human colleagues. It actually filled all these gaps that other software engineers were either, you know, too preoccupied, or, you know, this is sort of like that grunt work that they were putting off for a little bit later. And I always ask this question, you know, what does a legal Devin look like? If I were to deploy an autonomous lawyer into a team, what exactly are they doing? Are they backfilling more roles like a paralegal? Are they acting as a first-year associate? And the fact that we can't actually very clearly create that picture, mostly because of structural hurdles. We don't have a clear definition on what is quality legal work till today. Even today, I mean. And we don't have any understanding of what are the parameters around a legal task or what is legal work. When people ask you about legal advice, like, where is that line? And the fact that we don't have any of these definitions, to me, I am not worried that these tools are going to be able to do the carrot and stick, because we as humans have yet to be able to make those parameters and define those parameters. And so to me, I think where we're headed is better human machine collaboration, better organization of work, better division of labor. But I'm not worried that there's going to be a total autonomous entity. I think even right now, the notion of agents and agentic frameworks, they are models talking to one another. They are planning and executing tasks, but there's still some level of human intervention. I just cannot imagine, I think in the near future at least, that it would be left entirely on its own.
Dr. Ma, I have another question with regards to, you know, whenever you're doing research on ethics and the research on AI, the topic of ethics comes up. And as AI becomes more integrated into legal workflows, how can we ensure that human judgment and ethical decision-making remain central to the practice of law? Is there a risk of over-reliance on AI for ethical guidance?
Yes, so that's a great question. I think a lot of people are quite worried about the judgment component when you integrate with these systems. And, you know, recently I was shared this story and had the privilege of, you know, speaking with folks that had deployed across their law firm uses of generative AI. And what we're noticing is there is a gap actually between those who are paying for the AI tools in their practice and those who are actually forced to use them. Those who are paying, of course, are the partners, but they actually aren't the ones that are using the tools. What's interesting is that when they roll out the tool, they're forcing associates to use those tools. And so suddenly we have an emergence of sort of the equivalent of iPad babies, but these like legal AI babies almost. Some of these associates have said blatantly, I cannot draft a contract. I can't do this legal work without use of these tools. And so the dependency that you're mentioning here, Thomas, is already happening. But what's fascinating is that from a law firm perspective, they used it for a talent management reason, potentially. Now you've locked in your cohort of talent that because they can't they can't draft a legal contract without this particular crutch, I can't actually move laterally like I used to be able to as an associate. And so there's all these already existing downstream impacts in terms of reliance. But circling back to the first thing that we talked about, supervisory AI, that's precisely why I wanted this type of technology to intervene. And it's because these tools act as alarms that actually say, hey, this is your responsibility to make the final decision. And I think because these models are incredibly powerful, it's very difficult for you to say, like, this is when I should have the human in the loop and this is not. But having a small model intervene is actually just that nice alarm to say, this is where I know I need to plug in. And I think that that's precisely kind of the direction that we should be thinking about, that in light of the fact that these tools are going to be so enveloped in the practice, especially at the associate level, we need to think about secondary tools that can act as the guardrails, as the watchdogs, in order to help protect our practice.
I see. Dr. Ma, you, as a lecturer at Stanford, I'd like to ask you, do you think, I don't know if you already are, but should law schools begin incorporating AI ethics and governance into the curriculum?
I think absolutely. So the course that I have taught so far are these boot camps related to how do you build with AI. And I think every element of that boot camp already integrates ethics and safeguards into it, and risk mitigation and responsibility and accountable use. I think I personally am of the thought that we shouldn't necessarily separate an entire class around that. We for long have taught in a manner that was law of technology. How should law evolve in light of technology? But I think the best way to be able to teach the ethics component, the responsible use component, is actually just getting your hands dirty with knowing how these tools are being built and how these tools operate. Then you can say very safely, well, these are use cases that make sense and are not going to bring up problems like hallucination, for example. I frequently think that hallucination is a bit of a red herring because even in the legal space, we don't have something that's clear cut of this is right and this is wrong. In fact, it's always like, yes, it's right in this circumstance, but it might be wrong in this other circumstance. We always joke about lawyers saying it depends. Well, there's a fact to it, right?
But what about in cases where AI hallucinates case law? That's been, some lawyers have gotten in trouble. I've been reading, where, there was, hallucinatory case law that is introduced.
Right.
And you have to, you can't really trust what AI is giving you as far as, results. So what about in that area where it hallucinates and it's giving you information that's not at all, related to what you're working on?
My response is that I don't think we should have been using generative AI for information retrieval. These tools are statistical and probabilistic models. Meaning that if you wanted 100% accuracy on retrieval, and especially because there's the generation component, it is forced to give you a response. Naturally, it's almost like asking a human, right? Something that's out of their depth. They're going to make something up. It's the same thing here. And so to me, again, it goes down to if you had played with this technology, if you had understand the foundation, you would know that this use case is not necessarily the best use case. Of course, now there's lots of guardrails that are being put up. And so you'll see that hallucination rates are going dramatically down. But if you're going to reach 100% accuracy on retrieval, it's just not possible with this technology. And so to me, why I've focused on legal training is because the other side of the coin to hallucination is creativity and imagination. And so it's excellent at creating hypotheticals, excellent at creating simulations. And so if you want to teach lawyers those practical skills, give them a preview of what it's like to be a partner or a senior associate, generative AI is your friend here. It's your sparring partner. It's your ability to kind of give you that alternative perspective.
I see. Dr. Ma, we touched on ethics a little bit. What about privacy? To what extent should clients be empowered to dictate how their data is used and processed by law firms using AI? Could this level of control introduce new complexities or inequalities in legal representation? And what kind of a rabbit hole could we be going into with regards to privacy and privacy laws and integrating AI?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In terms of privacy, that's why we go back to the small models. These small models are, they're of a size that can actually live and run locally on your computer, so no information ever escapes. But to your question about clients being able to dictate, their data, I think they have every right to. And even in the analog way, they tell you what they think is privilege or not. And we also define those parameters too with our clients. And so I don't think that there's necessarily anything different now that we've entered into this digital AI era. I think it's just more, giving clarity around why this data needs to be shared in the first place. So for example, if there is a pertinent case, what are the limits of the data that can be shared? If it's related to trade secrets, well, maybe it is necessary given in some case for arbitration or whatnot. And so that it's all about, I think, open communication. But part of why in our supervisory AI demo that we had actually that option is because there still is, empowerment that's necessary for someone who is not in the legal space to know how their data is being transferred. It's why, there's regulation related to the GDPR and in the future of the EU AI Act. So, yeah.
Dr. Ma, relating to privacy, I just have one question. Yeah.
The screen sharing, the demo you're referring to, is that the one that's on the screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, and folks can get this at law.stanford.edu, and all they got to do is search your name and it'll come up.
Yep.
Great. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, relating to privacy, dealing with AI could be really, a privacy issue could be really nebulous. To give an example, I don't know if you've seen on social media where somebody takes a picture of somebody and they could do the geolocation from that picture. So for example, I could give a picture of myself, taking, in front of just a photo of myself. AI could figure out the geolocation, exact coordinates where I'm located. So when I'm giving AI information about myself, it's actually exponentially goes off into different areas that are not related with my original divulgence of my information. And from AI can, from a little piece of what I might offer, let's say even just my address or my family name or whatever, AI can extrapolate a lot more information that I wasn't willing to, that AI was not privy to be given in the first place. If you follow me, what I'm saying is that when it comes to privacy, it's quite nebulous because AI can do whatever it wants to go deeper and deeper in invading privacy. I don't know if you've thought about that issue and whether or not that's an area where things could get really complex as far as a law firm might get into trouble, giving certain data where AI could extrapolate other information that was not privy to the law firm.
So, I mean, this is symptomatic of recommender systems that predate generative AI. I think at the moment right now, Microsoft Azure is found in most law firms because they have the security architecture that most law firms have approved of. I think to your point, there are nevertheless going to be risks associated with data transfer and the sharing of data or the unlawful sharing of data potentially. I think that's in part why I had mentioned that it's necessary to have supervisory AI, in my opinion, which is a small model. Again, because it is local, it never actually treats the data outside of your device. It's almost as if you're saving a file local to your computer and nowhere else. And so in this case, this model is able to interpret the information that could potentially be sent to the cloud or elsewhere that could have downstream harms for your client. And that's where it flags the information. And so then that piece of data with your client will never actually leave to the cloud because the supervisory AI said, hold on, this doesn't seem like something you should be sharing with the broader enterprise AI system. And I think that is one of the ways in which we're trying to figure out how to implement those guardrails. The other side of it is actually Guardrails AI, for example, is another company that actually almost acts as a colander or a filter that if there is sensitive information, it just sifts that out essentially. Right. And so what's actually going through the system and going through the pipes, it is not information that the client didn't want to share or that the firm had inadvertently shared.
That's reassuring. Thank you for that response. Mac, did you have a question?
Oh, no, just to make sure that folks are able to get a hold of all this information. That's very informative. So thank you so much for it. Want to screen share. So, Dr. Ma, you're the Associate Director of the Stanford Program in Law, Science, and Technology, and the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics, which is short for CodeX. And so is CodeX and its webpage on law.stanford.edu the best place where people can go to see all the projects you're working on?
Yes, and also on our social media sites, we usually post our latest work. If you go into our blog or our publications, those are areas where the latest research, for example, we released just today the open source version of our negotiation simulator. All of these things are kind of featured right on our blog.
So the blog is right there that I'm on right now. So if anybody's listening to this, just head over to law.stanford.edu and /blog. So that'll come up. So thank you so much for that information. And of course, direct back to you. It's going to be law.stanford.edu /Megan-Ma. And I just got to say it only because people might be listening and not watching. So I want to make sure that they know what links to visit. So, all right. And I know you have a X or Twitter handle. So if people want to follow you, and that's, what is it again?
It's at Megan PH-Ma.
Awesome. Yeah, Thomas, you got anything else?
No, that was great. It was thanks for the opportunity, Dr. Ma, to interview, touching on this very leading edge topic, and I hope this is very useful for a lot of our listeners. Hope we didn't talk over anyone's head, but I'm sure we can have further discussions on this topic as your research continues.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me by email or if you want to connect via LinkedIn as well.
Your email is right on your page, Megan-Ma at law.stanford.edu. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And we'll be sure to put everything and all these links onto the blog post that we'll be putting out there. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for checking out LMIpodcast.com. Again, check out the YouTube channel. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.